and welcome to the Revenue Insights podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kris Alspach, Director of Revenue Operations at UiPath. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Amazing. And the first question that I always ask everyone that when they come onto the show, what has been your story to get to where you are today as Director of RevOps at UiPath?
Yeah, happy to share. I think I didn't really find revenue operations. Revenue operations found me, so to speak. So when I graduated college, it was the middle of the recession, 2009, I always thought I wanted to go to law school. So I sort of took steps to kind of pursue that and evaluate whether that was going to be the right fit for me. I worked at a publicly traded financial news website that was founded by CNBC's Jim Cramer back in the 90s. So I was there for about 2.5 years, doing a little bit of contract, legal assistant type work. And after about 2 years, I realized I wanted to go in more of a business-focused direction. I took a job at a small financial services firm, had a great mentor, a guy by the name of Mike Blumstein. He sort of took me under his wing. I sort of cut my teeth getting involved in sales forecasting, pipeline management, a little bit of revenue recognition logic as well. So I got some of the accounting end of things under my belt. But I think what really sort of made that pivot was my exposure to a tech stack. We didn't have an internal Salesforce administrator at the time. So I got certified. I started to become really dangerous with setting up Salesforce, administrating dashboards, reports, permissions. And that just sort of opened the floodgates of what used to be called sales operations, what I now love to call revenue operations, right? A more broader strategic, career path. So after that smaller company that I was with, I kind of migrated down, did some stuff in ad tech, very advertising focused, but still operational in nature. And, I sort of cut my teeth at a technology company based in Silicon Valley. It's called Risk Management Solutions. One of my first bosses there, her name was Debbie Stevens. Debbie was kind of that first person that really told me and showed me that revenue operations can be a career. I think for the longest time, I was sort of floating around trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And she provided that justification and kind of showed me the ropes, gave me people management experience, and I learned a ton from her. And from there, I kind of pivoted into startups. I had a great boss, another great mentor and friend to this day, Ryan Wilcox. He runs global sales ops at a company called Tonkian. Ryan recruited me to a tech unicorn called Dataminer. Spent about a year there, and then Ryan moved over to UiPath and gave me a call and said, "Hey, I'm at this fast-growing, explosive company. I need your help." And really, I hopped on the rocket ship, and I haven't looked back after 3.5 years.
Yeah, I've been kind of digging into a little bit into your kind of journey, and you kind of touched on it quite nicely there in terms of like the fast growth that obviously UiPath has experienced, particularly over like the last 4 years while you've worked there. So what was it like, when you first joined, and how has it changed since then?
Wow. So when I joined the business in December of 2018, the Americas team was about a $40 million ARR business. We're now approaching the 500 million mark 3.5 years later, which is just phenomenal growth. I think it's a testament to, number one, our culture, number two, our leadership, but number three, our sales team. Our sales team and the operational folks that are behind them. Really the product offering is there. The proven value to our customers is there. We just needed to execute, and we did so, and I think we did so really well over the last few years. But in the early days, it was very much building the plane as we were flying it. Super anxiety provoking. I think we sort of live by a motto internally at UiPath, and that is the only constant is change. We experience a ton of change on a weekly, monthly, quarterly level at the company. I think it keeps things fresh. I think it energizes people. But I think over time we've sort of slowed down. We've kind of found our niche within the market. What's not really a niche so much as a market leader within the RPA and automation space. So we've matured a ton. We've matured a ton in our internal processes. Obviously, going public, we have a ton of regulatory restrictions now, so that trying to pivot our operations to be in line with all of our compliance procedures has really posed a number of challenges, both for our internal finance teams, but our sales teams as well. So we're just trying to adapt and keep the plane moving.
I love that the metaphor of building the plane while you're flying it. I think that will definitely go onto the title for this one. And I guess kind of like similar question in the sense of from a revenue operations perspective. Then I mean, you mentioned like the growth from 40 to 500 million ARR, which is mental difference, right? And from an operational perspective, how do you approach actually getting a handle on that, and actually tackling it from the perspective of we need to build process around this to be able to handle it and actually scale it?
Sure. I think first and foremost, it's a collaborative task, right? It's not solely on revenue operations to define what those processes and policies are. I think there's a ton of work that gets done by not only RevOps, but our legal folks and our finance folks. Those relationships are really, really tight. So I think that to the extent we need to polish and make our internal cadences a little bit more streamlined, it's not all on revenue operations. We have that collaborative environment. So it's very much in our culture to sort of put all hands on deck, figure out the best way forward, and learn how to scale. I think we've leveraged a ton of our sales management experience in order to get us to this point. We had an absolutely fantastic leader in the Americas business. His name is Kris. Kriss was a former Google Cloud Platform exec, worked at SAP before. He really took the reins of the Americas ship and kind of brought us to that next level. So I think the know-how and the operational rigor has to be instilled by your leadership team. And hey, like it's been painful. It's been really painful experiencing that growth. And it's all about execution, right? Like when you have a product that has strong market fit, you have customers who are willing to adopt because it solves a business problem for them. You just have to figure out the best way forward. And, we've spent hours and hours on in-person QBRs and meetings internally, and not to mention all the Zooms throughout the last few years we've been under the pandemic. And it's challenging digging into the details, forecasting details. How are you building your pipeline? Do we have enough to hit our sales goals? What are the contracting structures that are going to work best for us to not only maximize our revenue, but provide licenses and value to our customers when they need them? All of those are questions that we've had to work through, but it's been a really tremendous experience, that's for sure.
Amazing. If you could roll back the years back to December 2018, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
Oh man, I would have pushed for more resourcing for my revenue operations team in the Americas. When I joined, my initial remit was to support two of our sales areas within the Americas, our public sector team and our central team. So I was effectively doing two jobs. I have a colleague, Stephen Geller, who was doing two jobs at the time. And then we started gradually building out our team. But I think where we missed is establishing sort of a career path for revenue ops folks internally. So instead of building from the ground up, having an internship program, having early career analysts that we could bring on, help us tactically run the business, run analytics, partner with sales reps and sales leaders, we kind of got ourselves into a position where we just got stretched a mile wide and an inch deep. And it was just a pure staffing situation. So I think I would have been a lot more vocal about fighting for the resources that we need, because without those resources, revenue ops can't be that strategic business partner for our sales leadership. That the dependency that sales leadership has on us, sort of falls on the staffing levels that we have sometimes. There's only so much efficiency that you can get.
Yeah, because how many are there in the revenue operations team now?
so, so in the Americas, we have about 8 folks right now. We have different levels of staffing across our different sales theaters, but in comparison to the amount of revenue for the business that the Americas supports, we're severely understaffed. I think we're working on ways to kind of true up that staffing level through lower cost and more junior resources, because the folks that have been on my team have been with the business for at least 2.5, 3 years, 3.5 years in some points. So they know the business really well. They have strong partnerships with the sales leadership. They can't get to everything every single day. Like, they're working super long hours. So we need to come up with a creative solution to kind of buffer that bandwidth and get us to a point where we can execute a lot more streamlined. And my folks are working 8 to 10 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day.
And because it's really interesting from my perspective. Like, actually, that's from a lot of the businesses that we speak to. It's a real range. Some only have like one RevOps person, whereas others, in this case, you've got 8, and it's like we actually need more of them. So how does the and obviously as you've grown over time, how does the structure, or how has the structure like changed over time, and how do you actually start to process that?
Yeah. So when I initially started with the company, and we're sort of in between 2 different worlds right now in terms of how we restructure our sales organization and support that sales organization, just because we're getting larger and larger. But initially, what we would do is a one-to-one matching of RevOps manager with an area vice president, like a second line sales manager. So that RevOps leader would partner with that AVP and be their chief operating officer effectively. Anything that they needed help with in order to hit their number, my team would be responsible for. Headcount planning, ensuring we had enough people on board. Quotas are accurately set. Territories are fairly cut. Forecast calls are running smoothly. Pipeline is being measured and built. Leads are being followed up on. So anything that is part of that revenue engine, my team was touching and is still touching to this day. So that partnership is great with the sales leader, because a lot of the time I think sales leadership doesn't expect enough out of revenue operations. So we need to encourage our sales leadership not to sort of buy into the revenue operations model, but expect the revenue operations model to work, right? My team should be running forecast calls. We should be running our weekly business reviews. And we're riding shotgun with the sales leader, but we're the one that should be driving the conversation. And I think that over time we've needed a little bit more support. So if I have one revenue ops manager that's supporting an area vice president, 4 first line sales managers, and then each of those first line sales managers have 7 to 8 reps underneath. Yeah, okay, that's pushing it, right? Like, that's 30, like a 30, 40 person organization. I think of another person that I've been working with for the last 2 years. He's been running our emerging enterprise operations. Well, that organization is like 3 times the size of an average enterprise area, and it's been just him for the majority of the time. So Nick has done a fantastic job running his business, but I do think that until you staff your organizations properly and get them the bandwidth they need, it's sometimes challenging to give that business the support that it needs.
There was a couple of bits you said there that I love. One
Yeah.
is around the partnership between revenue operations and sales, but also around getting to that point of the sales leaders actually expecting it. So how particularly as you've grown, how have you achieved like that level of consistency across the different sales teams in different regions within the Americas?
Can you be more specific on the consistency? You're thinking like consistency of support?
Yeah. So, for example, do you have like operational cadences in place? So perhaps you're forecasting in the same way, running
Oh
your
yeah.
pipeline reviews in the same way.
Yeah. Operational cadences are really the core of the business. I mean, without having established processes, you're going to fall flat on your face, right? I think the challenge for us at UiPath has been to adopt the same meeting structure, cadence, and process globally through America, EMEA, and APJ. Like that's been the challenge. But within our Americas geo, we've been able to set the tone. We typically, now we're kind of under a little bit of a restructuring right now, but until recently, we had forecast calls every Monday. Each sales leader wasn't really a forecast call. We called the weekly business review because you're touching on your forecast. You're touching on action items from the week before. You're looking at your headcount, like how are your reps performing? Do you have anybody on a PIP? How are you doing recruiting new reps? Do you have leads in the funnel that haven't been actioned? What about deal registrations from the channel? Is your team following up with that? How is the inspection of your pipeline going? Like, do we have tactical next steps and executive investment asks for all of our top 10 deals? Are our swing deals on top of, like, do we think we can convert at least 20 to 30% of those? So I think that conversation has been pretty standard across the Americas business. Now, hey, it's a challenge for my team and a challenge for a sales leader to prepare for a rigorous forecast call, a rigorous business review call every single Monday. But that operational cadence has really helped us execute, because then what happens, right? Our sales leader for the Americas gets on with the chief revenue officer on a Tuesday, the day after he gets all of these updates. He can concisely communicate his business plan to go execute to hit his forecast call and even get beyond his forecast call. And I want to say that every single quarter that I was in seat as the operations leader for the Americas, we hit our forecast call. We may have been plus or minus 1% to 2% each quarter. And there was one quarter where we were a little off. It was most recently, but it was due to one deal structuring situation that we have. But I think because we were managing to a number sometimes, and we can get into the whole philosophy over how to forecast and how some people do it differently and the different opinions on how that's done. But we drove the business to a number. We didn't always have the dollars lined up, but we manufactured our way to get there. Super scrappy, super stressful. But again, it was kind of part of building the plane as we flew it, and we were hitting our numbers. So,
can you shed a little bit more light on, perhaps a simplified version of how you manufactured that?
So, I'm probably not the best person to ask on deal structuring and manufacturing. Our sales executives are just incredible people. They're incredible motivators. I think that what we would do early on in the quarter is we'd make a very aggressive forecast call for our Americas business. Some of our sales leaders wouldn't have enough to really get us there. They would, maybe, I had my sales leader super exposed because he was calling 90% of his number, but his AVPs were only calling 80% of theirs. So, okay, we got a $10 million gap. Well, how do we go close that gap? You identify your swing deals. Can we increase value for those swing deals? What are the different deal structures we can offer? Can we offer an ELA to a large enterprise customer? What about a multi-year component that is not only going to maybe give the customer a little bit more favorable pricing up front, but it's going to help us hit our forecast and deliver the number now to public investors. So, in the earlier days, it was not a huge thing to miss your number, being a private company. But now, with our CFO getting on with the street once a quarter, it becomes incredibly, incredibly important. It's all about teamwork, and it's all about that tactical execution. But identifying that path to fill that gap, I think, is critical, and you have to do that early on in the quarter. One of the things that we always would do is we would ask our VPs, maybe. It's usually like a month before the start of the next quarter, right? Identify $1 to $2 million customer targets. So incremental $1 million targets. Okay, if I get 1 to 2 per RVP and I've got 20 RVPs, I mean, come on. Like, if you're not converting at least 25% of those, you're in trouble as a business. But I think it allowed us to wrap our heads around the opportunity potential that we had. And then, go deal manufacture our way to get there.
Amazing. And something that you touched on there, and actually I can see as like a common theme is, around teamwork. and collaboration. So is that something that you would consider to be like a core like value of working at UiPath? And then I guess second part of that question then is how does that then filter down into how, the revenue operations teams are working with the sales teams?
Sure. So that was, I think that was one of the happy accidents, I guess, I discovered when coming to UiPath. I knew the company had solid technology. I knew that it had been, founded by 10 people in an apartment in Bucharest, years prior.
Love that.
That's really all I knew. But I came in, during our new hire orientation that first week and learned a lot about our cultural values. So those are bold, fast, immersed, and I think the most important is humble, right? And I had always wanted to join a collaborative environment, whether that is, at the corporate level or at the RevOps level. So it was very clear by those values, especially that aspect of humility, that I was in a collaborative environment. And that teamwork, as everybody says, sales is not an individual sport. Sales is a team sport. You have customer-facing folks, you have back office folks, you have leadership, you have sales engineers giving demos. Like, it's all over the place. That has really then sort of trickled down into my philosophy for forming a team. And I've had the opportunity to lead our function, lead our organization. I've recruited a couple people along the way. I think what was really interesting for me as a team leader is to get promoted into the role as opposed to coming in from the street. So I had peers who are now reporting into me, which was, come on, like, so ripe for imposter syndrome, right? Like, I was working with these such incredibly intelligent people, and now all of a sudden I have to lead them, and I have to be the one that sort of delegates and asks them for things. That was an initial challenge, but I really not only try to embody those core values that we hold dear as a UiPath organization, but I try to be super transparent. I try to communicate with my folks, like I would my peers, right? I can't share too much confidential information, but I want to be really realistic about the problems that we might be facing or the goals that we have for the current quarter or the current year. So I think that element of transparency is well received by people on my team. And in terms of recruiting, in terms of bringing new folks on, like, I've got a couple values that I look for. Obviously you want to find somebody with decent experience, but I don't think it's the end all be all. Like, I want them to speak the revenue operations language, but hey, if you know how to do, some element of forecast management, you know how to manage a pipeline, I don't really care if you know how to, form equitable territories. I can teach you that. Like, you know the basics. I look for someone, number one, that I can trust, that has some of that experience. And I think the main thing that I look for, and folks on my team will kind of laugh because I've said this before, but I hire, my main goal in hiring is that I want to hire someone who is smarter than me, like, just point blank. I want someone who's going to challenge me as a leader day in and day out, and I want them to challenge each other. I think one really cool thing that my team has done, without my guidance, without my direction, they took it upon themselves. My team has a separate team meeting, just my directs. They get together, I think, once a week on a Wednesday, all 6 or 7 of them, and they brainstorm. What are you seeing here? Oh, I'm seeing this in the West. I'm not seeing this in the East. How can we collaborate and try to get to a point where we're all marching in the same direction and leveraging best practices that everybody's using?
I love the way that it all just came together, and I couldn't agree more. Like, on the point of hiring people ultimately that are smarter than you, right? Because that ends up in you get to a situation where you're having people like that are not really a threat in a way, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
But actually, you're bringing them on board to fill your weaknesses, right? Like, I'm sure within revenue operations, like, there's so many different specialisms, and in reality, it's like, well, actually, I don't really like doing, doing forecasting and pipeline management. Actually, I love doing this different area, and it's bringing in people that complement that, so make you better as a whole and as a unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the element of forecast management and pipeline management, because we've again, sort of been in limbo in terms of a team structure, has been concerned. But what we were trying to do from an operational efficiency standpoint is not only have an alignment with sales leadership in each of our areas, in each of our, what is now, that they're now geographic areas. We haven't verticalized as a sales team, but that may be UiPath version 4.0 at this point. But what we had tried to do within my team is say, okay, hey, I own operations for the central, but I also own forecasting. I own operations for emerging enterprise. I own everything related to pipeline data management. Now, hey, it was easier said than done, right? We sort of moved into this, operational competency model and sales leadership support model. So it was a bit of a hybrid structure. We've since then kind of instituted a centralized operations function globally that has helped with some of those efficiencies. So right now, I've got one person. His name is Spencer. Spencer runs our forecasting cadence globally. So anything related to analytics, reporting, he's on top of. Systems as well. Like he's on top of. So I think there's something to be said about operating a business within a particular country or a particular sales theater, however you want to define that. But until you can stand up a global centralized function that helps get everyone on the same page and marching in the right direction, there's going to be some throwaway work that you're doing day in and day out, and it's just kind of the cost of doing business in revenue operations, I think.
Yeah, and what's so interesting to me is the way that you talk about, I guess, these like the frameworks that you're building, right? So I can only assume that 4 years ago it was a case of, right, well, we'll build one for for handling that 50 million worth of ARR, and then okay, but how do you actually start to scale that then to is it right? We'll just apply it to a different market, or are you constantly like optimizing and improving that framework? So that it does enable you to be able to scale and that it actually holds up as well.
We're constantly scaling apps. We are constantly scaling,
Yeah.
constantly changing. We've had a couple new incredible executives join our organization over the last 2-3 months. We have a new co-CEO. We have a new chief business officer as well. And what we've done is sort of pivot our operating model. So we had a broader revenue operations or go-to-market operations organization globally that had a deal desk function under it, that had a sales technology or a Salesforce and sales tech stack administration function under it. Those functions have now moved out, right? So we have the sales tech folks reporting into the IT unit. We have our deal desk function reporting directly into our chief business officer. So we've sort of thinned out some of that operational responsibility, and my hope is that our function is going to be more strategically aligned with the businesses that we support, but we still have some changes and room for optimization along the way. Like I can sort of brainstorm what the new model and what the new structure of our group will look like, but I don't know. I think sometimes it's fluid for us at UiPath. Like sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. A lot of the times I think folks want us to just sit still and execute on the business. But that's just not really the reality of the situation sometimes. So, yeah.
And so as you scale, and then to a point that you kind of made there, in order to be able to optimize, how do you identify like which bits aren't working and then actually come up with an approach to start to fix that?
Sure. So I think when you're focused on any type of process improvement, either tactical processes or strategic processes. By strategic processes, I'm thinking, how do you run your annual planning process? I think it all has to come down to something that's measurable, and for me, that's revenue, and revenue is driven by sales rep productivity. So if I can do something that gives my sales reps and sales leaders time back to spend with customers, that's a win because that leads to more revenue for the company. There have been a couple instances. One member of my team, her name is DePauli, she dug in with some of our folks down in the public sector and realized that they were spending so much time trying to get deals processed. They were doing back office work, back and forth between distributors, partners, customers, just trying to align paperwork so that our internal accounting team could book and recognize revenue, right? If I have a sales rep spending an hour to process every deal, or let's just say a half hour just to process every deal, and they close how many deals a quarter, like that adds up. It's a day or two of their life spent doing administrative functions. If I can identify not only the process bottlenecks and fix the process, that'd be one way to solve it. If I could identify the issues and hire some lower cost resources to take that burden off the sales rep's plate, that's another way of solving it. But UiPath is an automation company. We have to start using our own technology internally a lot more. I think the problem, hey, a lot of these processes are primed for automation. If we can wrap our own technology around them, that's fantastic. I think a lot of more mature businesses can leverage UiPath because their processes are defined, they're repeatable. They've been doing these things, or they've had humans doing some of the more tactical, mundane stuff for years and years and years. Whereas UiPath, some of these processes are maybe 4 or 6 months old. I think once we get to a point where we have our operating, like at least our back office systems and processes set, then we can start automating some of that work for the sales folks. Our accounting team and our back office finance functions are already using UiPath bots with tremendous value to the organization. I think there's a stat that our CFO likes to throw out, like we've increased our sales transaction volume by X%, but we haven't increased the headcount of people supporting the business because we have leveraged technology, our own technology. So, when as we're scaling, as we're trying to make our organization more successful and streamlined, like that's what I look at number one. Like, can I give my sales reps more time back to spend with their customers? And if I can, I feel like that is generating more revenue for the company.
Amazing. What I love is the way that you really work so, or at least by the sounds of it, work so seamlessly, like with your sales teams and the reps, right? And so I know, having spoken to kind of revenue leaders in all different areas, like that's definitely not always the case. So if you could give one piece of advice from your experience at UiPath of how revenue operations and sales could work better together, what would it be?
Oh man. So I think I'll go back to the point that I made earlier. You have to have that executive buy-in for the revenue operations function. And it can't just be buy-in, it has to be an expectation. Your revenue leader has to not only understand the concept of RevOps, and you can explain that to them, that's fine, but they have to expect more from you. They need to think of you as their chief operating officer, as someone that helps them execute the business day in and day out. In terms of partnering and working with sales, I think that the larger organizations grow, I think the less interaction folks on my team may have with individual sales reps. Like, we are here primarily to be business partners for our sales leaders, so first line and second line. But honestly, the intel is gathered from the field. I think RevOps needs to be sitting in on customer calls more often. They need to be going on those ride-alongs, right? They need to be always involved in regional sales meetings, whether it's, okay, hey, a team of 8 direct reps and a leader, whether it's an all-hands call with 40, 50 people. RevOps has to be not only a participant, but almost leading those interactions. And I think we need to pull the audience, right? We need to reach out for sales, get feedback on new processes, which we very much do. A number of new things that we've put out recently have really been driven by feedback from the field, especially sales leadership. Some of those folks just love digging in, and that feedback. I don't want to build something, I don't want to change something unless my leadership is going to approve of it, unless they're going to find it valuable day in and day out. So I think the more that RevOps can do to sort of pivot from only thinking about operations to kind of that whole end-to-end revenue cycle, that customer-facing motion, I think the better off we'll be helping sales be better.
I want to wrap up with one final question.
Sure.
Slightly off topic to what we've been talking about, but if there was One book that you would recommend to other revenue leaders, what would it be?
You know what? It's sitting on my shelf. I gotta go find it. Is it 10
You can go
dysfunctions?
find it.
Is it 10 dysfunctions of a team, or is it 5 dysfunctions of a team? So 5 dysfunctions of a team, solid book. I read this a number of years ago with one of my teams when I was working in ad tech. Yeah, I think it talks about different personalities, different leadership styles. I think it's good for revenue ops folks, sales folks as well. I like the classic good to great as well. There's an analogy in there talking about having the right people on the bus first before you can start putting the bus in motion. And I think that I take that into account whenever I take that philosophy into account whenever I'm thinking about building teams and how we build an organization. Right, it all starts with people. People are the foundation, and I think UiPath really has bought into that, and we've done a really good job hiring, and we guard against that. We guard our culture very dearly. So yeah, the 5 dysfunction of a team is good. Good to great is another one. Admittedly, I have 2 bookcases filled with books, and probably only about 10% of them read at this point. So I got to stop working so much and actually dig into books.
I love it, and that's a fantastic way, I think, for us to wrap up. Final thing, Kriss, to everyone listening, if they want to learn a little bit more about you, connect, ask any questions, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Kriss with a K, and I'm sure you'll post the spelling of my last name. But yeah, happy to collaborate, to network, to share best practices. Maybe my best practices are not always going to be the best, but I love brainstorming, and I love meeting other folks in the revenue operations and sales silos. So please connect.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put it all down into the show notes. Kriss, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Everyone listening, thank you so much once again. We'll catch you again next week.